Hello, everyone. Today we have the honor and the privilege of having a very special guest on the channel, and he is Pastor Doug Wilson. Pastor Wilson is a teaching elder at Christ Church in Moscow, Idaho. He also serves on the board of New St. Andrews College. He is married to Nancy, and they have three children together, as well as many grandchildren, as well as great-grandchildren. Pastor Doug is also a prolific author who has written many books, including Mere Christendom, When the Man Comes Around, Rules for Reformers, and many others. Pastor Doug is also the primary penman for Blog and Mablog. Pastor Wilson, thank you so very much for taking the time out of your incredibly busy schedule to join us today.
Glad to be with you. Thank you.
Okay. Now, I gave everyone a very brief description, and most of this audience is probably already familiar with you. But for those who may not be, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself, your life, your conversion, and your other work in the ministry?
Um, sure. I grew up in an evangelical Christian home. My parents were very dedicated and very consistent Christians. It wasn't just a profession. My dad was a literature missionary. Well, back up. My mom was a missionary in Japan after the war, and my father was a naval officer in the Korean War. That's how they met. And so they got married in Japan. When Dad got out of the Navy, Mom left the mission field. I grew up in Annapolis, Maryland, in a consistent Christian home, and I've never, basically, never had a time where I wasn't functioning in a Christian context. Now, when I joined the Navy, so I grew up in a Christian home, made a profession of faith very early on. I was 4 years old. When I joined the Navy, when I was 17, went in when I was 18, I realized soon that the Navy was not a bastion of righteousness. And, and if I was going to do this, I was no longer going to be able to be propped up by my parents. So I had to be a serious Christian, on my own 2 feet, basically walking with God. So I spent my time there, just under 4 years in the submarine service, and then got out of the Navy and came to the University of Idaho to go to school. And about a year and a half into that, I was part of a Jesus People type startup church, and the pastor, that went about a year and a half. And one Sunday, the pastor said, well, I got a job in another city, and I'm going to be not here next Sunday. And good luck, everybody. It was kind of the '70s, right? And I was up front with a guitar. I was a song leader, college student song leader. And so I preached the next Sunday, and that's how I wound up doing what I'm doing. That's a compressed version of how I wound up in the ministry. And then later I began writing seriously. So I would describe myself as a minister in the first place and a writer second.
Fantastic, fantastic. Thank you for that, Pastor Wilson. Now, for those who don't know, what is Man Rampant?
Man Rampant is a talk show that I host where we have 6 or 7 or 8, I don't know how many, interviews where I sit down and interview interesting people for an hour. And we are now in season 7, we're in the middle of dropping season 7 right now. And this is available on Canon Plus, which is Canon Press's streaming service. So it basically it's an opportunity for me to do sort of long form interviews with interesting people. Yoram Hazony, George Gilder, Joel Salatin, Stephen Wolfe, lots of folks.
Fantastic, fantastic. So the topic of masculinity comes up in this season of Man Rampant. Could you tell us a little bit more about that without giving away too many spoilers?
Yeah. So for many years I've defined masculinity as being the glad assumption of sacrificial responsibility. So authority flows to those who take responsibility, and authority flees those who try to evade responsibility. And I believe that taking responsibility is essentially masculine, and it is a mark of masculine maturity when men are eager to take on a load. Um, and our flight from maturity in the modern world has resulted in many males, basically being boys who shave, um, who are fleeing from responsibility. They don't want to be given the extra weight of marriage or kids or a demanding job or vocation and so on. So masculinity is something that uh, it's part of it's what enables a man to fulfill his vocation under Christ.
Great, great. Thank you for that. So, based upon my own research on the subject of biblical manhood and womanhood, there seem to be two primary views, that is, on the conservative side, complementarianism and patriarchy. Now, listening to you, in my opinion, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems you fall somewhere in the middle of those two positions. Could you tell us a little bit more about your own perspective in this area?
Uh, yeah, I think that's an astute observation. Uh, in the in the in the conservative evangelical world, complementarians are basically those who say that men are the head of the home and that that the pulpit is restricted to men only. But complementarianism has a right wing and a left wing. Okay. And the left wing is basically egalitarian, but they use complementarian words. They'll have women doing everything but preach the sermon. And women can be jet fighter pilots, and women can be hard driving CEOs and girl bosses, but somehow mysteriously in the home, there's the tie vote is broken by the man for some arbitrary reason. That would be a left wing complementarian. A right wing complementarian is someone who understands that the role relationships in the family and in the church that God has assigned have relevance to the broader world also. Um, and then over in the world of patriarchy, there's the left wing patriarchy, which would be I would say right wing complementarianism and left wing patriarchy uh, abut each other. They're right next to each other. And then right wing patriarchy would be a domineering tyrant type of guy. So basically, left wing complementarianism is basically a feminist, and right wing patriarchy would be basically a Muslim cleric keeping his wife under his thumb. That would be no good on either. It's no good on either end. I believe that God has given men authority in the home, and that authority in the home, when honored and respected the way it ought to be, is going to have repercussions in the world of business, in the church, in politics, and everywhere else.
Super, super. So, one group which seems to be gaining some popularity, even in some evangelical circles, is the Red Pill movement. Sometimes it's called the Manosphere. Some of its teachers include men like Andrew Tate, Rollo Tomassi, and Rich Cooper. Is there anything we can learn from these individuals? And also, what are some of the important areas where they are just plain wrong and, in fact, harmful?
Yeah, and also a great question. So, um, here's the problem is if I could draw an analogy on the debate or discussion between modernists and postmodernists in the academy. Now, a Christian has to look at that and say a plague on both your houses. There's a problem everywhere. But in the fight between modernists and postmodernists, members of each group will often say very insightful things about the deficiencies of the other. The postmodernists see the gaps in the modernist thinking, and the modernists see the gaps in the postmodernist thinking. And you can learn from that sort of thing without taking sides, right? I would say it's the same sort of thing with someone. I think Rollo Thomason wrote. I think his book is The Rational Male.
Yep.
I read that book, and when he is dissecting the foibles of the modern beta male assumptions, and many gospel coalition types, many evangelicals basically put a sanctifying veneer over being a beta male. They call it servant leadership. And they think that you are to be a leader by serving, when actually what God calls us to do is to serve by leading. Men are called to lead. That's their role. That's their function. And so consequently, when someone like Rollo is dissecting that position and he's talking about what actually is attractive to women, he is frequently right and they are wrong, right? But it's the sort of thing where you have to be obviously careful because some of the insights that people like that in the manosphere circulate or talk about are insights or tips that you get from pickup artists. You know, guys who cruise the bars looking for women who go to bed with them, and they talk about what works. And obviously, the Christian can have nothing to do with that kind of manipulation and that kind of fornication, that kind of sin. But sometimes they point to something that is true. Why do some Christian women go for the bad boy, and the marriageable nice guy, sweet guy at church who would never ever say a cross word to her? Why is she not attracted to him at all? Well, the manosphere sometimes has insights that explain how people work. And I think that Christians can learn from them provided we wear rubber gloves. We can pick up some of these things, but we have to be very careful.
Yeah. Yeah, discernment is very important in that area. Now, Red Pill and the men's sphere are movements primarily outside the church. But there is also a movement within the church, in particular the Reformed Church. And I'm not going to name names.
Right?
I'm just going to say that their form of masculinity is being taught in places like Texas and Utah. Again, what are some of the things these men get right, and what are some of the things they get wrong?
Yeah, I would say that there are some, and I'm painting with a broad brush here also. There are some in I would call it the dissident right of the Reformed evangelical world. I would divide them into two groups. Okay. And of course, there are a lot of people who would say I'm part of the dissident right. I'm really conservative and I'm part of this mix. So take that for what it's worth. But on the hard right, or the right that responsible conservatives worry about, I think there are two problems that are manifested. One is that there are people who are sort of openly envious of neo-Nazis, openly envious of people who have go all the way when it comes to political incorrectness. Okay, I'm going to go in for the whole thing. I'm Holocaust denial, everything. And then there are some in the church who wish they could be over there. They're playing footsie with that. They're attracted to that. Okay, that's one problem. And I think they're going to wind up there if they don't watch their step. They're going to wind up there. You can't flirt with something without setting yourself up for a fall. The others are the kind of people who are just their BS detector is busted. They leave their windows and doors unlocked while living in a bad neighborhood. Right? They're not evil men themselves, but they don't see the hazard or the danger that's coming. So they're not wolves, but the fact that you're a poor shepherd doesn't make you a wolf, but it makes you more vulnerable to wolves. So I would say that some of these men who are starting to sound like, well, Hitler had his good points, that kind of thing. That person, I would say that I think you're a wolf, or I'm going to budget for that. I think you're a wolf, and you're going to hurt the sheep. But then somebody else, I might have a criticism where I say, I think you need to be more attuned to the danger of wolves than you are. there are some Christians, true men who love Jesus and they love their flock, but they're not as combative toward this sort of threat as they ought to be. So, to take one example, one of the things that is circulated on the right is the netter principle, no enemies to the right. So, now I agree that we ought not to have any enemies to the right simply because the left demands it. If the left starts yelling about somebody and wants me to denounce him, I must not denounce anybody because the woke left is demanding it. But if I go all the way and say I have no enemies to the right, all that's doing, and I'm a pastor, all that's doing is telling the devil where he needs to attack me from next. Right? If I'm resolved to have no enemies to the right, he just is going to attack me and my flock from the right.
No, I've heard you say that before. Yeah, it's very, very insightful. Now, I don't want to pigeonhole or oversimplify, but as a general rule, why do you think a lot of pastors have hardly any reservations when it comes to criticizing Christian men, but when it comes to criticizing Christian women, there seems to be a fear and reluctance?
Yes, I think that's very true. And there's a great book written by a feminist, actually, by Ann Douglas called The Feminization of American Culture. And she describes how the American church drifted away and then fell away from its Calvinistic roots. And there's a long series of episodes in this, but I believe that the church has been essentially feminized, right? And what we call virtuous are essentially feminine virtues. The men we send to seminary are the men that the church ladies picked out when he was a young boy and squeezed his cheeks and said, "Oh, you're such a godly young boy. You should think about the ministry." Um, and that is a problem. The reason that ministers don't address feminine sins from the pulpit is fear, because they don't want what is going to happen. Um, and and men have been trained to be kicked around, right? So if you go to a big box evangelical church on Father's Day, you can expect to hear in many places, you can expect to hear a sermon kicking the men all around the sanctuary. Men, you need to step up. You need to pick it up. Where you been all this time? You need to do better than that. Yeah, come on. And just try to imagine anything like that on Mother's Day. Um, I mean, it makes Chernobyl look like a day picnic. Um, it would just be devastating. And so consequently, one of the things I would tell young ministers who have taken a call at a new church and they're getting their ministry established, they need within the first few months, within the first 6 months at the outside, they need to establish the authority of the pulpit. And in the authority of the pulpit, they need to make a point of saying something like they're preaching through Ephesians and saying something. Now, you women, you need to be careful of this, right? These are temptations that women are uniquely susceptible to. Now, I heard from a woman who joined our church a number of years ago, and when they first started coming, I did something like that from the pulpit, and it was like, oh, you know, he's talking to He's talking to me. He's talking. I, Now, this is all conservative evangelical pastors and churches would grant that women can be or women are sinners, but it has to be in our feminist times. They have to be sins that are generic to the human condition. So a woman could get in trouble because she embezzled, or she was a bookkeeper and she uh, fell into dishonesty, but that's not uniquely feminine. Okay. So if there's a criminal case, drug use or or embezzling or something like that. Everybody acknowledges that women can sin that way. But when Paul's writing Ephesians or other letters, he says, now you husbands, you've got a unique set of temptations here. The women don't have these temptations. I'm going to talk to you about these. And then he addresses the women, and then he addresses the children. So this is something that we really need. Ministers need to establish their right to speak authoritatively into every basic human condition, including the calling of wives and mothers.
Yeah. No, no, that's brilliant. Thank you for that. And you touched on this a little bit earlier, but what is some advice that you would give as a pastor to young men who are perhaps, like the example you gave, struggling in the dating market? And also, what advice would you give to young Christian women who are looking for a godly man?
So this really is a systemic problem, and it's not just a problem with. You're not going to fix it by telling men to get off the dime, and neither are you going to fix it by, uh, telling the women a particular set of things. There really is a broad cultural problem here. When I got married in 1975, I was 22, my wife was 23, and we were right in the middle of the pack. That's when people got married. Usually, frequently, right when you got out of college, right after you graduated, and that was the age. And the average age right now is between 28 and 30. That's when people are getting married, and this has to do with uh, a number of issues. One is the ubiquity of pornography, right?
Mhm.
And lacks sexual morals. Uh, why buy the cow when you can get the milk for free, as the saying goes. Now, of course, that's not an option for any man who wants to walk with God, but it's one of the pressures. It's one of the temptations. It's one of the things that has um, jiggered the market generally. Okay, so there's no radical difference between Christian men and women and the age they marry, and and that can't be good. If you hit adolescence when you're 13 years old and you don't get married until you're 28 or 29, that's 15 times around the sun without any lawful sexual outlet. And if you don't have the gift of celibacy, that means that you are going to have this constant frustration, challenge, struggle. That's not healthy. But then there's another factor, and that is what feminism has done to women's expectations about what they're going to be called to do. Um, so women have been propagandized. We all have, but the women have bought into it more readily that you can have it all. You can go to college, you can have a career, you can get married when you're 32 and still have it all. And the answer to that is no, you can't. You can't. It's just simply false. And the occasional uh, what phenom woman who got two PhDs, one at Harvard, one at MIT, while bringing up three children and opening her own business. There are the occasional phenomenal people like that. But then when you set that person up as, well, this is normal, this is the way it is. What we are dealing with is, I think, a catastrophe of how many women who are in their 30s today are childless, right? And what's that going in 50 years? In 50 years, 1 in 4 women will have nobody. Who's going to take care of them? Who's going to? It's just it's appalling. It's terrible. But you can't say, well, why don't the men step up? Well, the men don't want to marry a girl boss. Uh,
Exactly.
that's not what they want. And women have been taught that what their duty is to be spunky. Their duty is to be a firebrand. Their duty is to be a go-getter. Their duty is to be a girl boss. Um, and I recently read a comment from, I won't tell you who it is, but a high profile public person who was divorced, and she's married again. And her first husband said, "Well, we divorced because we both wanted the same thing, a wife."
That is so true. Yeah.
Right. Well, a man wants a woman, not not the kind of personage that shows up in the propaganda media film. That's not what men want,
Mhm.
um, and or need. They, but there's no way around it. We have to get back to the stereotypes, right? Right. Um,
Definitely.
instead of saying, well, I think I think the man should take out the garbage, and I think the woman should make the biscuits. And as soon as you say something like that, everybody comes unstuck. What, a man can't make a biscuit, and the woman is not. Before she married him, she had to take out the garbage, and yeah, you know. But when a man opens the car door for his wife, he's not. He's not making the statement to the world that my wife is an incompetent who can't open her own car door. What he's saying is that when a man is out in public with a woman, it is his responsibility to honor her. It's a signal. You're making a statement. You're not, and the statement is not, my wife is klutzy. Uh, so when my wife goes to the grocery store without me, she can manage her own car door. She can drive by herself, does all those things. But when I'm with her, I have to honor the sex roles that God has assigned. And culturally, those sex roles um, tumble out into what the feminist world calls stereotypes, and they call them damaging stereotypes. And well, everybody with a brain knows knows that the stereotypes, if dad's not home and there's an intruder, mom needs to know where the gun is. That's not everybody knows that, but it's not. It's not fair to young men or young women to leave them uninstructed as to what their role is. A lot of the rootlessness with young men is they don't know what they're for. In Genesis, God assigns Adam to provide and protect. He's to protect the garden, and he's to provide for his wife, tend and keep. That's the assignment in Genesis. And young men need to be taught that's your job. That's what you're for. And women need to be taught what their job is, to be keepers at home, to be into husbands and into kids. And it's all there on the surface of the Bible.
Yep. I totally agree with everything you just said. Now, I don't want to get too off track, but since I have you here, I'll ask you because
All
you've
right.
written in this area. Are the neo-nationals, nationalist, socialists, and kinist movements within Christendom something that we should be concerned about, or are they simply a small number of people online who aren't all that influential and who are making a big deal about for no reason?
Okay. I would say somewhere in between.
Okay.
Okay, somewhere in between. I know a number of pastors who this a problem with this sort of thing is not uncommon in our churches. Okay, it's not like one church has this problem and everybody else is fine. Usually, across an array of churches, at least the church is pastored by friends of mine, they've got this problem in their churches. Now, the problem in their churches is in onesie twosies. It's a small problem in their church, but it's a diffused problem. It's a small problem everywhere. Shall I put it that way? It's a small problem everywhere. And I think we should be responding to it the way an oncologist would respond to some worrisome dots on your lung x-ray. It wouldn't do any good to say those black dots are not very big. Okay, they're not very big, but good doctors don't overlook things like that. Now, if I could, so I think that good shepherds, good pastors, are going to be attentive to this and are going to be preaching about it, dealing with it, one-on-one counseling. They're going to be on it. But I could throw one other thing into this mix is I think we're in the middle of a tumultuous time culturally, and uh, a lot of the commotion has to do with Trump 47 and the collision between the deep state and the populist uprising against the deep state. And there's a lot of disinformation, a lot of turmoil, a lot of controversy going on. Now, a lot of this uh, anti-Semitism and racialism, ethnic animosity sort of exploded within the last 4 years in Christian circles. It was like it was an unheard of thing, and all of a sudden, it's a big splash. I think that a big part of this is economic. Okay. If you have been calling basically who has been treated for the last generation, who has been treated as the cancer of the planet? Well, white, young, heterosexual males. There, and where's this problem manifesting itself? White, heterosexual, young males. You can't if people are going to hang you for a thief, no matter what you do. At some point, people are going to start thinking, well, I might as well steal something then. If you're going to treat me as a racist, misogynist, sexist, animal, and brute, and there's nothing I can do to get you to stop saying that, then I'm just going to do it, right? And then if on top of that, the people that you're calling all these names are are excluded from law schools and medical schools, and they are systematically discriminated against economically, and a young man uh, can't buy a house, can't afford a house for his wife and two kids. And a generation ago, that wasn't the case, right? There really was a robust middle class, and it was possible to buy a starter home and start, right? Well, there's a lot of economic angst that's going on. And when that happens, and it's coupled with all the wokeism from the left accusing whites and males of being the problem, you're going to get a recoil, you're going to get a reaction, and that's what I think we're seeing here. That's what this is. People start looking around for a scapegoat, and the Jews are historically always available for that. And in America, there's other minorities, principally blacks, are available for that as well.
Yeah, they're coming after the
Now,
Indians too, so
yeah,
and
all
I am
right.
one, so
So here's this is the next thing, and I don't know if this is going to happen, but if this turmoil, uh, if Trump's second presidency is considered a successful one, okay, then if his presidency is successful, and that would translate into kitchen table issues, economically successful, uh, I think a lot of this goes away. If there's a Trump boom, then I think that Vance would be a shoe-in for the nomination after Trump, and I think he would continue to do this. If there's a boom after this, a lot of men who are on spending a lot of their time online looking up conspiracy theories will be married and trying to get their lawn mowed. Uh, it was well said that men are like flatbed trucks. They drive straighter and better with a heavy load. And when men get responsibility given to them, which an economic boom would provide, I think a lot of this angst and turmoil would go away.
very good points, sir. Very good points. Now I know you have some new projects and plans lined up. Can you please tell us what some of those entail?
Sure. one of the things is we have an annual conference called the Grace Agenda that's coming up in a couple of months in August, and that takes a lot of prep uh, here. It's a thousands of people come to Moscow for that. That's a big annual project for us. I am working on several books. I'm hoping to I hope we send off to the printer um, in the next week two books. One called "Boast Not Against the Branches," which is a treatment of Romans 11 and the historic Reformed understanding of Paul's prediction that the Jews are going to return to Christ and the conversion of the Jews. So I argue that this is the historic Reformed position. There's one book on that. That should go off maybe today to the printer. And then another one called A Primer on Christian Nationalism. After Stephen Wolf's book was published and my book, Mere Christendom, a few years ago, a lot of questions were generated. And what I did is I went through my blog and sorted out a number of questions, FAQs about Christian nationalism that I had answered in different ways, and then arranged them all in a primer on what is Christian nationalism, what are we arguing for, what are we asking for, etc. And so that should go off to the printer, Lord willing, next week.
Great, great. Look forward to that. So can you tell people who are interested in your ministry and work where they can find you?
Uh, sure. The best thing to do to find what I'm involved in is my blog, which is called Blog and Mablog, and the address is dougwills.com. So if you go to dougwills.com, Blog and Mablog will come up. And if you open up the front page, we created a portal to pretty much everything I'm involved with on the front page there. So ACCS, New St. Andrews College, Canon Press, Logos School, all the stuff. There's a way of navigating to that from my blog.
Fantastic, fantastic. Well, Pastor Wilson, thank you so much for taking the time, like I said, out of your very busy schedule to join us. We appreciate you coming on the channel.
Really appreciate it. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you like the content here, you can subscribe by clicking on the icon on the bottom right. Then you can hit the bell of notifications. I upload a new video every Wednesday and every Saturday. Have an awesome week, and for my brothers and sisters in the Lord, may the grace of the Lord Jesus Christ, the love of God, and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with you all always. I will see you all in the next video. God's blessings on your week.